Hey everyone, welcome to the Pregnancy After 40 podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Johnson, and today we have guest Lindsey. Lindsey does amazing things. I thought we were going to be talking about one particular thing today, and then when we spoke actually on the phone before this interview, I realized she had so much more information to give. So Lindsey, obviously, as you can see, is a doula. If you're watching this, she is a doula. But we actually initially brought her on to talk about hypnobirthing because hypnobirthing is huge nowadays. It's not something that I really heard of, especially when I first had my daughter at 25, and I didn't really hear about it when I had my sons just recently in the last few years, over 40. But she talks about hypnobirthing, what it is, and how she practices it with her patients. She also talks about placenta encapsulation, which is also becoming increasingly popular amongst her clients and women in general. And then we're going to end it with her experiences as a surrogate. She was a surrogate for two couples. So we're gonna talk about that. So this is not going to be a short podcast like I thought it was going to be. But Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So, first, we're just going to start off with your personal story as a professional, as a doula, and a childbirth educator. If you can just tell everyone how you got into both of those professions first, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. I became a doula 12 years ago, and unbeknownst to me, I had already been a doula. All of my friends and many family members had asked me to be present at their birth just to help keep them calm or, maybe manage their family members. And I was working for an airline as a flight attendant, and my airline went under, and I had nothing better to do that weekend. And I had recently miscarried twins. And so I was doing some research on miscarriage and how people are just treated in the United States after pregnancy loss. And this word doula came up. And there happened to be a training that weekend in Cleveland, Ohio, and I live in Columbus. And so I went, and it's been my heart job ever since, and my full-time job for the last 6 years. And I became a childbirth educator because I took hypnobirthing with my daughter, because at the time they didn't, I'm allergic to local anesthesia, and they didn't stock preservative-free lidocaine on L&D floors 10 years ago around here. And so I wasn't able to have an epidural during labor. And so I knew I needed some coping skills and techniques to get me through labor. And so I took hypnobirthing. It was very helpful for my 37-hour labor at 31 years old. And then I did it again with my son at 33 and had an unmedicated, unblocked home birth with him. And it was so amazing and empowering that when he was 5 months old, I went and took the training to become a childbirth educator through HypnoBirthing Institution. And then just 3 years ago, I took the Lamaze certification because while I love hypnobirthing, it's not everybody's cup of tea. So I added in the Lamaze certification 3 years ago, and I've been doing placenta encapsulation for about the last 6 years.
Okay. So I'm going to go back a little bit to something you said initially when you first started speaking. Stated that when you first became or started studying to become a doula, that you recently had a miscarriage and that the way that they treat women after having miscarriages is not the greatest. What do you mean by that? Like, what was your opinion on that subject as far as when women do miscarry?
I mean, for me, I had taken a positive pregnancy test, and we thought we were probably 6 weeks along. Turns out we were about 12 weeks along. And before I could see my doctor on Monday for pregnancy confirmation, I started bleeding and miscarried that weekend. So went into the ER, and the ER, whether it's a miscarriage or a stillbirth or a fetal demise, the ER is no place to give birth or especially to lose a child. They have no, you would think that specialists who specialize in trauma triage would be a little better at it, but they really have no training in dealing with loss, and especially with perinatal loss. And then just the way society treats you too, just the things that people say, well, it's for the best. There must have been something wrong with the babies. We found out it was twins later. There must have been something wrong with the babies. Oh, well, it's a blessing because carrying twins is so hard. Um, just people mean well, but in our culture in America, we do not know how to grieve and we do not know how to support other people in their grief. And when you're talking about losing a child, it's even worse, right? And we're just really not good at it in our culture.
Okay. So, have you ever had an experience just as a doula where there's been a stillbirth, and how do you actually support the client in that situation?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have. It's one of those things where if you do this long enough, you are certainly going to have clients miscarry. I have supported people through 25-week stillbirths. Oh, just last month, we had a 23 week twin loss that we supported through. Um, my first perinatal loss as a doula was a 35-week stillbirth, immediately after, like the day after the baby shower.
Wow.
It was really rough. Um, how we support people, we walk their grief with them and we give them permission to grieve however they need to grieve. We're that one safe person that's not going to tell them how to think, how to feel, how to act, because there's no right or wrong way to grieve. And it doesn't matter if you lose your baby at 2 weeks or 42 weeks, it's still a horrific loss, and nobody gets to tell you how important your grief is. Um, and we're the people that will never say at least, because
Mm-hmm.
when you lose your baby, there is no at least. We hear that a
Right.
lot. At least you're healthy. At least you can have more children. At least you can try again. At least you weren't too far along. There's no at least. There's
Right.
no there's no okay in this. And we're the people that are there that will walk through it with you and tell you that it is okay to feel all of your feelings and it is okay to be distraught and upset and inconsolable. And we
Mhm.
help you, figure out final arrangements. And if you want, we'll take photos of you with the babies, no matter, what gestation they are. There's typically, after about 12 weeks, there's typically a visible fetus. We
Mhm.
will document that with photos. We can do footprints. A lot of our parents choose to cremate, and if you want, we can help you find, you know, some people choose an urn. We've actually had people that have made jewelry out of their children's ashes. We help you figure that out and how you want to remember your baby. And
Okay.
then we're also the people that we put it on our calendar, and every year we text you and call you and see if you're okay on the anniversary. You know,
Wow.
we want to acknowledge that that baby did have a life and that it had parents that loved it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot. I hadn't really, thought about that, especially from your perspective, but that
Yeah.
it's important. And I think the fact that you went through that you
Mhm.
are a great person to be clients. Yeah. So, okay. So, you also mentioned that you became certified as with Lamaze,
Mhm.
because hypnobirthing is not for everyone. So,
Right.
tell us a little bit about Lamaze, because I've been hearing about Lamaze since I was like 2, right? But
Right.
I've never taken it. Just tell us a little bit more about Lamaze and what it is.
So I think a lot of people nowadays think of Lamaze like what we saw in the movies back in the 80s, the he, hoo, right? And they kind of associate Lamaze with, like the hippy dippy. And today's Lamaze is not your grandmother's or your mother's Lamaze. Lamaze is the most widely recognized childbirth education program in the world. And it is definitely a comprehensive basic childbirth education program. When I teach Lamaze, we teach about all of the interventions. We teach about all different types of breathing techniques, and we teach about all the common pain relief techniques that are available in hospitals. So Lamaze is definitely a very straightforward, informational childbirth education class that covers all of the basics and gives you skills and techniques for any type of birth that you want to do.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So definitely I'm thinking like on the floor, on your back, like holding a pillow or whatever and breathing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you gave us clarification on that. Okay. So let's focus back to hypnobirthing. Just tell us um, a little bit more in depth, like what hypnobirthing is and why you started implementing it with your clients.
Right. So hypnobirthing is a comprehensive childbirth education program, but where Lamaze, approaches it from a more medical institutional standpoint nowadays, hypnobirthing is definitely focused on physiological, unblocked, low intervention birth. Whether that birth happens in home or in a hospital or in a birthing center, hypnobirthing doesn't, have any opinion about that. But Marie Monaghan, who wrote the book, I think we're at 29 years now, and created the HypnoBirthing Institute. She just passed a couple of years ago. She really focused on the positive process of becoming parents, right? That this doesn't have to be a traumatic experience that you endure, that it can be an amazing, transformative, enjoyable experience. We certainly don't promise anybody a pain-free childbirth, right? There's a reason we call it labor, because it's hard work. But it does not have to be the most excruciating thing you ever do in your life either, right? So we give focus on several different techniques as far as self-hypnosis, which all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, but practicing getting into a hypnotic state and using that to stay relaxed and focused. We teach scripts that help you to do that. We teach breathing techniques that help to reduce pain and tension. And then we teach rapid relaxation techniques, partner deepening techniques, so the partner can be an active participant in the process. And also like give the partner a ton of support skills, physical support measures, verbal cues that they can use with the birthing person to help them enjoy the experience as opposed to be traumatized by the experience.
Wow. Okay. So how long in advance do you have to start training your clients, or when do you start taking them in order for them to be actually be prepared to hypnobirth during labor?
So we tell people like it's a 5-week class. So like the last time we recommend registering would be like 34 weeks, right? I've definitely had people that have registered at like 32 weeks and then they birthed early and they didn't get to finish the class. We always joke the earlier the better. My class right now, I have a woman who is due in October, right? So like the first session last week, she had just come from her appointment where she had the pregnancy confirmation. So there's no wrong time in pregnancy to take hypnobirthing, but just like anything else in life, I always say like you can't run a marathon 2 days after you start running, right? You need to work up to that. You need to train for it. You need to practice for it. It's the same thing with hypnobirthing. You get out of it what you put into it. And so the earlier you start, the more time you'll have to practice. There's no
Okay.
wrong time to take it, but the earlier the better.
Okay. So in saying that, I assume that if you just learn the techniques of hypnobirthing, that you can continue to practice with those skills throughout the pregnancy. Is that how it
Mm-hmm.
normally works?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh,
There are recordings that you practice with at home. We teach you exercises that you and your partner do together. There are scripts that your partner can do with you. There's some physical exercises that you continue to do throughout pregnancy that will help you have hopefully an easier childbirth. Um, but yeah, like it's really more about changing your framework and how you think and talk about birth and preparing for birth like any other major life event. There's always those people that like when they get married, they just say, hey, let's go get married and go to the justice of the peace. And that's great. But for most people, when they get married, it's a huge ordeal that they plan for several months for, right? Just like marriage, there's no right or wrong way to give birth. But if you want to have an easy physiological birth, unless you are just blessed with good genetics, um, the more practice and effort that you put into it, into preparing, the easier it will be.
Okay, so is hypnobirthing, is it like 90%, 100%? Is it mental, or is there a physical component to it as well?
I mean, we teach you comfort measures as far as hands-on comfort measures. We definitely teach you breathing techniques. Breathing is key. Um, but just like you can be the best athlete in the world, but like LeBron James has a bad day and he plays a bad game every once in a while, right? So it's always, 90% mental.
Okay. It's interesting that you use LeBron James coming from Ohio.
Well,
So, is there like music involved as well, or like scents and oils, or um smells, and I don't know, it's like different things. Yeah,
that's
pretty much
not
like
really
music, smell.
part. Yeah,
Okay.
that's not really part of hypnobirthing, but we definitely recommend creating an environment that feels welcoming and home-like, especially if you're planning a hospital birth, because the less clinical you can make it feel, the less scary it will be, right?
Okay.
Because it's that fear, tension, pain cycle that we get into. The more afraid we are, the more tense we become. The more tense we become, the more pain we experience. And the more pain we experience, the more afraid we become. And it's just this perpetuating cycle, right? And so if we can create an environment that, instead of having this like aura of danger, as hospitals do, because other than when you're giving birth, what other time are you admitted into the hospital unless things are pretty dire, right? So to kind of help with that aura of danger, we definitely recommend, creating a soundtrack, having something that will make it smell not like a hospital, right? Like taking something from home that is cozy and comfy and beautiful, like a blanket or a robe or a picture. Different people choose different things, but, setting the environment and setting the stage is definitely key.
Okay. Awesome. So, how many births have you attended as a doula?
I'm at 254 right now.
Wow. And how often do you work with patients or clients that are 40 and over?
I would say, like, I just turned 40, and since I've been about 35, it seems like about one third to one fourth of my clients, and we take 6 a month. So a good 25% of them are usually over 35, and about 10 to 15% are over 40. The oldest mother I've had that has given birth naturally was 49.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Um, okay. So is your treatment at all any different just because you're an older mom, 40 and over, or is everything pretty much the same?
I mean, from my end of it, no. I definitely warn people that the care provider and the expectations from the institutions will change, right? There's a certain set of practice parameters for those under the age of 35, and then there's a set of practice parameters for 35 to 40. And then for those of us who birth after the age of 40, which I birthed 10 days after I turned 40 last year, for those of us over the age of 40, there's a whole separate set of practice parameters. And we become geriatric pregnancies. I love that term. I said, me and my ancient uterus.
Right.
Um, and the practice parameters for obstetrics and midwifery for over the age of 40 definitely changes, and their expectations of you change. Um, the science is there to justify some of it. The science is definitely there to justify extra monitoring. The science is there to justify induction after 41 weeks. But some of the different changes in the practice, there isn't a ton of evidence for it. But I'm friends with a lot of certified nurse midwives and a few OBs, and they explain, and I understand it from an organizational perspective, that they have to protect themselves so that they can keep the doors open to provide care for as many people as possible. And a lot of times it's not the doctors that are writing the policies, it's the insurance companies, unfortunately, because we have to consider liability in our culture. We have a fairly litigious culture.
Yeah, I can remember when I was pregnant with my son at 41, just reading about the rate of cesarean sections in the United States versus other places in the world and how much the rates were higher here in the States. But it basically boiled down to, like you said, liability. They're
Yep.
like, was there something else because something happens? They'll look at, was there something else that could have been done to prevent a bad result? And so they go ahead and institute these C-sections over letting women go naturally or what have you. So, yeah, it's definitely interesting in how politics and insurance plays a part into our bodies in giving birth
Yep.
and all of that. Okay. So we're going to shift a little bit. And again, if you are joining us live and you have any questions or comments to Lindsey, definitely put them in the chat and I'll get them over to her. But we're going to shift to placenta encapsulation. So I'm not very familiar at all with this new, I don't know what you call it, new practice, I guess. But I did read, I heard briefly, maybe a year or so ago, that after birth, one of the things that some women have done is to basically consume their placenta after birth. So, and I didn't read any more into it because that was like more than I could
Oh, yeah.
comprehend at the moment. But that's something that you do. You do placenta encapsulation.
Mhm.
So if you can tell us a little bit more about that, the theory behind it, how it helps
Yeah.
women, um, and all of that and what you provide to your clients.
Right. So it's one of those, like, I always try to acknowledge, as a middle class white woman, like in middle of Ohio, I always try to acknowledge the cultures from which these practices came. I mean, just straightforward, it's cultural appropriation. I acknowledge that and I recognize the cultures that these practices came from. There are several different cultures that do some form of placenta consumption in the postpartum period. Um, in Central and South America, there are some traditional midwives that do raw preparation. They might use it. They might use a chunk of the placenta as a pack in the cheek if a mom is hemorrhaging because of the progesterone levels in the placenta that cause contractions. They in India, there are preparations of the placenta that are used in Ayurvedic medicine. I am not very familiar with the history of that. But the training that I took has the deepest basis in traditional Chinese medicine. And, it's that premise of this is our organ and it's bioavailable iron, progesterone, vitamin K, vitamin B. It's our iron and our vitamin K and our vitamin B. So it's more bioavailable than taking a synthetic supplement or even taking like cow's, liver supplements. Um, the way in which we prepare it, the traditional Chinese method is to steam it. You do lose some of the nutrients when you steam it, but it is also, that it is temped out to an appropriate level so that any bacteria is killed off so that it's safe to consume. We do a lot of raw prep because a lot of the people that we work with, they want as many of the nutrients and hormones as possible. And so we just clean it. So we literally wash it. We remove as much of the blood as possible. We definitely remove any, meconium or vernix that's left in or on the placenta. And we clean it, and then we remove the amniotic membrane and the cord. We dry the cord as like a keepsake for the mom. And then we take the placenta and we put it in a dehydrator and we temp it out to 150 to 160 degrees for 12 to 36 hours. We make sure that it's completely desiccated and then we grind it up and we put it in capsules so that you can take it just like you would any other pill. So typically people start consuming it about 48 to 72 hours after birth. And the premise is that it helps you to gradually wean yourself off of progesterone because in pregnancy, your placenta acts as a progesterone pump. And when your placenta comes out of your body, that progesterone pump is turned off. Part of that function is to turn on your prolactin pump so that you start lactating. But part of that progesterone pump loss from the placenta birthing is that we almost go into withdrawal from progesterone. And that's part of what causes the mood swings and the tiredness. Plus, we've lost a decent amount of blood when we give birth. And so we're often anemic and low on iron and vitamin K. So this is a great bioavailable source of all of those things. A lot of people do it because they're like, we're mammals, and almost every other mammal consumes their placenta immediately after birth. So why do we think we're any different? There's lots of different reasons why people do it. Anecdotally, it is said to improve postpartum depression and perinatal mood disorders. There's only about 7 decently designed studies out there. They all disagree. So I don't have a ton of medical or scientific evidence to say you should absolutely do this and it's beneficial. We have literally centuries of evidence from other cultures where it has been done and been very helpful. And we have lots of anecdotal evidence from people who have done it and benefited from it in the postpartum period. A lot of people say it helps with their mood swings. A lot of people say it gives them a ton of energy. None of the people that I have encapsulated for have had any issues with anemia in the postpartum period. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence for the benefits, but not a ton of scientific evidence.
Gotcha. So that is a lot. Like just the process of going through the encapsulation is a lot. So how did you even get into that? Because that's not something that everyone provides. So you're a doula, you're a childbirth educator, you're into hypnobirthing. How did you get into placenta encapsulation?
It's another thing that I kind of fell into, right? So most of the women in my family had experienced some kind of postpartum depression. And so when I had my daughter, I was actually very worried about experiencing postpartum depression. And so being in the circles that I run in, the kind of crunchy birth circles that I run in, and I'm not a very like crunchy person personally, but it's kind of the environment I function in. I knew a person here in Columbus that does encapsulation. At the time, she charged a very reasonable amount for it. And I told my husband it was something I wanted to try. And my husband is very, very, I don't want to call him cheap, but he's very cost savvy. How's that?
Yeah, let's do that.
And so we found a website that it was like a WikiHow website on like how to do it yourself. And after he watched the videos, he was like, how much did you say she charges? He's like, oh, worth every penny. Go ahead and book her.
Yeah.
And so she came and did the placenta for my daughter. And then she came and did the placenta for my son. And then she retired because I had her to refer my clients to. And then she retired. She quit doing it. So I had all these clients that were interested in it, and I didn't have anybody to refer them to. And so I took a training and started offering it. It was not, I never thought I would want to like bring human organs into my house and cut them up and dry them up and put them in pills. But if my clients want to do it, I want to make sure they have somebody who is going to do it safely for them. And so that's why I took all of the bloodborne pathogen and the cross-contamination and the serve-safe trainings. And I'm a little obsessive about the way in which I clean and prepare the area and clean and prepare the product.
Okay, that is so interesting. So, okay, so once the placenta is encapsulated, how many does a woman take after birth? Like how long does it last?
So that's one of those, like, it's different for everybody, right? Because like just this week, I processed 3 placentas this week. One placenta got 120 capsules, one placenta got 140 capsules, and another placenta got 200 capsules, right? So I get however many capsules out of the placenta, depending on, different placentas have different mass to them, right? It's an organ. It's like going to the store and buying cow liver, right? Some of them are 8 pounds, some of them are 6 pounds, right?
Wow.
So it's an organ. So everybody's organ is a different size, right? So some people get about 100, some people get well over 200. And the dosing is different for everybody too, because some people have larger body mass and some people have higher metabolisms. So the highest dose we say is 3 capsules 3 times a day with meals. The lowest dose is 1 capsule 3 times a day with meals. And then when you're about 3 to 4 weeks postpartum, we recommend weaning off of it gently until you're down to 1 capsule once a day. So if you're at that point and you feel good and you feel solid and your healing is great and mentally you feel great, you can throw those in the deep freeze and actually keep them for menopause.
Wow.
You can also use them during your monthly cycle. And then we also make a tincture out of Everclear and pieces of the placenta that have been desiccated. And that tincture, if it's stored in the freezer, it can last indefinitely. Like you can keep
Wow.
adding more Everclear to it, and it just gets weaker as it gets older. But you can use that during your monthly cycle and during menopause as well.
Okay, that is that's amazing. So, okay, so you mentioned that women can use the placenta in menopause. So,
Mhm.
how does it work in menopause?
So it's those same hormones, right? Progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, all of those lovely hormones that we get low on during menopause. And so this is just like it's a gentle way to ease into not having progesterone postpartum. It's a gentle way to reducing our levels of estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone in our perimenopausal years.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, because it's when we still have OBs and doctors as well. Have you ever heard that doctors object to women actually taking the placenta as capsules?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Yeah. I've definitely had some doctors that are like, that is, that's witchcraft, it's voodoo. Like, I've had all kinds of comments made to my clients. Um, the doctors that I know well, that I work with regularly, they know that I'm going to prepare it safely and that I would never prepare a placenta that is questionable. So, like, if you have an infection during labor, like if you have a fever over 100 that lasts for more than a little while, we should not encapsulate your placenta. If you have, choreo after labor, we should not encapsulate your placenta. If your baby develops an infection in the first 48 hours of life, we should not encapsulate your placenta. There are definitely parameters to do it safely. And if it's prepared safely, if it's cleaned appropriately, and then it's heated to an appropriate temperature, it's safe to consume. If it's not prepared safely, we don't know if it's safe to consume or not, right? So I think a lot of doctors worry that it's an uncontrolled factor, right? We don't have any scientific evidence for it really. And because it's not being done in a lab, it's being done in either the individual's home or the encapsulator's workshop, that it's an uncontrolled substance from their
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, so that just kind of brings to the point, like if you do decide to go the route of placenta encapsulation, that you definitely want to vet the person that's doing it and
Yeah.
make sure that is done properly. But it's also a testament to, you have to make the decision that is right for you.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means going against what your OB thinks. But I mean, I definitely can see it both ways. Just,
Mm-hmm.
if it's not done properly, it could cause harm. If it's done properly, that it's probably okay. Okay, so that's the information on placenta encapsulation. That was a lot,
Yeah.
and I'm so glad that there are people that do it, and then they do offer it as a service. But I don't know how popular it is across the states and in the U.S., but it's definitely good to know that it is offered. So next, what I want to talk about, this was like a total surprise when we connected, is that after being a doula and after having your own children, you decided to be a surrogate,
Mm-hmm.
and you're a surrogate for two separate couples. Can you tell us a little bit, one, again, how you got involved in that, why you decided to become a surrogate? Because that's like one of the most selfless things that a person can do. And then we'll talk a little bit more about your views on that. But how did you get into that?
Yeah. Again, kind of fell into it. That's like the story of my life is I fall into a lot of things. Um, So my birth with my daughter, it was a 37-hour labor, but it was very medically uncomplicated, right?
Mhm.
Um, and was able to have a physiological childbirth with very little interventions, right? And with my son, we had him 21 months later. We had him in our living room at home with two certified professional midwives in attendance and a doula. And his birth was 8 hours start to finish. And I can honestly say his birth didn't hurt. I know people think I'm insane when I say that, but it's true. I have the video to prove it.
Wow.
I didn't take the video. My husband took it and then showed me later. But because I told, like, I think women who have traumatic birth experiences, we don't have a healthy outlet for that in our culture. And when you try to share it and you try to process it with other people, they tell you, well, you're healthy and your baby is alive. What more do you want? Or, well, you both lived, like you were lucky. Or you have a healthy baby. Why are you complaining? Right? Well, medical assault and trauma and feeling like you've been abused or mistreated or feeling just like it was out of control and like you didn't have a say in your care is not healthy, right? And so when we have people who have traumatic birth experiences, and sometimes you can do all the right things and hire a doula and have a certified nurse midwife and, have the best care provider in town, and you can take the prenatal yoga. And sometimes, baby just doesn't like being in the birth canal, or, baby turns the wrong way in labor and things go a little sideways, and it can be really scary and traumatic. And I think we need to acknowledge that and give people a way to process that. That's why in doula care, we include a postpartum appointment when we process birth, and we're available to our clients. We jokingly say they get us for life. And I've had people that have reached out to me 3 and 5 years after their births and have asked me more questions about their labor, because just now they're thinking about it and questioning it, right? And that's okay. Like, we don't have to deal with all the hard things all at once, because keeping a human being alive is really hard. And maybe you process the emotions later, and that's all right too, right? But because we don't have a way to process those emotions in our culture, we tend to kind of puke them on other pregnant people that we see.
Yes.
I always compare it to customer service experiences. Weird thing to compare birth to. But if you go to a restaurant and you have horrible service and horrible food, how many people do you tell?
No one at all.
Really? Because like
Everyone.
everybody I grew up with, they tell everybody.
They do.
Right.
All complaints are because people are, well, let me not say all complaints. Most complaints are because, someone was unhappy. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Right. And when you have a bad experience that you really didn't enjoy, you tell everybody about it. Right. But if you have a great experience, most people don't tell that many people about it. Right. And so that was why when I had such a phenomenal experience with Finn, I told everybody about it, because I wanted people to see that birth could be awesome and amazing and positive and restoring and empowering and beautiful. And so because of that, a couple of our friends who were unable to have children reached out to us and said, well, since you love birth so much, would you be willing to do it for me?
Wow.
And so my husband and I took literally a year to think about it, and we talked it through, and we decided that yes, we would be willing. Birth is easy for me. I'm blessed in that way. And I like being pregnant to the extent that you can enjoy being pregnant. And obviously I like birth because it's kind of my jam. It's what I do, right? And my husband loves kids. Like, if we could afford it, we'd have a dozen. I don't want to raise a dozen. He does, right? He loves kids. And so for my husband, the thought that our friends wanted to have a baby and couldn't, and had been on adoption lists for a long time and hadn't been able to adopt, that was really heartbreaking for him. And so he's like, if this is something that we can do to help them, then let's do it. the odd thing about it was that both of our friends that had approached us to ask us to do it, we went through most of the process to get approved as a surrogate. And then they decided not to pursue it, not because of us, but just because their finances or their personal situation or whatever. It's that their story is not my story to tell, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I had already been approved as a surrogate and it didn't happen. And I was like, okay, like it wasn't meant to be, right? And then it was one of those things where like a friend of a friend, a mid a doula I know was talking to a midwife that we know. And the midwife's daughter's teacher, it was two dads. They were both science teachers. One was a science professor and one was a science teacher. And they had been trying to have a child, adopt, find a surrogate for 15 years. And the doula was like, hey, Lindsay was approved to be a surrogate. I wonder if she'd still do it. And so the midwife reached out to me. She's like, are you still thinking about surrogacy? And I was like, we were going to do it for friends. Like, it wasn't really anything that I was committed to. I was going to do it for a friend and it didn't work out. And she's like, well, just meet this guy.
Mhm.
So he met me and my children at a play cafe and we talked and we hit it off. And 6 weeks later, I was pregnant with their twins. So
Wow.
it went really quickly for us, like the whole lawyer contract issue and all of that negotiation, like we were all just like on the same page from day one. Um, but I think because I'm a doula and because, most doulas have a very non-judgmental approach to birth. Like there's no right or wrong way to give birth. There's only what's right for you and this baby. That's definitely how we practice, how my business practices. Um, And I've also, I babysat from the time I was 11 and I ran childcare in churches and stuff. I loved those kids. I would die for those children. They were not my children, right? So I have a lot of people that will be like, oh, I could never be a surrogate. I couldn't be pregnant and then not get to keep the baby. And I'm over here like, parenting is hard, people.
Right.
Like, I have two. That's all I can handle. But I like pregnancy and it's not hard for me. So why wouldn't I help another family have kids of their own? I just approach it as it's really hardcore babysitting.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so first and foremost, I'll say, okay, my personal opinion about having more kids at this age, I'm like, I would love to have another child, but I don't want to be pregnant. Like that's like my thing. And you're like totally, I was like, you love pregnancy, you're
Don't make
so
me
totally
raise them.
okay with it. Yes. See, we're like opposite. I'm like, I'll raise one. I just don't want to like actually birth
Right.
one right now. I think that's a
And
lot.
that's
Just like
what's
this whole,
great, right? Isn't
yeah,
that what's great about this world is that there's so many different types of
yes.
people and that we can all help one another and we all have different strengths and weaknesses and preferences and we can all work together. That's what I love about it. The second family that I was a surrogate for was a couple that were in their late 40s and they'd been trying for years. Like I was their fourth surrogate and they still had not had a live birth, you
Oh,
know? And God bless them. Like we were so lucky in that with the first transfer, we had a baby and had a perfect 40-week delivery. She was born on her due date and healthy and happy and there she'll be a year in a month, right? Like,
that's that's amazing.
yeah.
Okay, so in our group, in the pregnancy after 40 group, so there are so many women who, have had an issue with struggle with infertility. They go to fertility specialists and they're told a lot of times, like after 42, 43, like, oh, you're not going to be able to have a baby on your own using your own eggs.
Yeah.
And so there's this huge debate about, some people see it as, okay, well, if I get an egg donor, I'm birthing the baby. And if I birth the baby is mine. Other people see it as this is someone else's eggs, someone else's, DNA. This baby is not mine. And however you feel is how you feel about it.
Mhm.
But what is your approach to you birthing someone else's baby with their eggs? How do you feel about it? at the end of the day, as far as the attachment with the baby after you birth the baby?
So again, I viewed it as extreme babysitting. So yes, my genetic material, babies are built out of fat and amino acids, right? Like if we break it down to like the very like building blocks of matter, humans are made out of fat and amino acids, right? So yes, the baby used my fat and my amino acids to be built, right? But the genetics, that genetic code was not mine, right? I have no genetic relation to the baby. For me, like the cool part about it, like this cool scientific part about it, is that a little piece of that baby's DNA will always be with me. It alters me fundamentally on a genetic level, and that baby will always be part of me, right? And I'll always be a part of it in that it has some of my fat and amino acids that help to build it. But the reality is that on a molecular level, like we turn over every 7 years. So on a molecular level, after age 7, that baby doesn't have any of me left, right? So that's how I approach it. I approach it as extreme babysitting. I love this kid. I die for this kid, but I don't want to raise this kid, right? Other surrogates definitely are more attached and I keep in touch with both of the families that I cared for. We're invited to their birthday parties. We send them Christmas presents. They send our kids Christmas presents. That's not the case for all surrogates, right? And I always told the families that we cared for, I said, any contact we have in the postpartum period is totally up to you. You are this child's parent, and you determine the relationship you have with me and my family after birth. Both of the families have chosen to keep in touch, and at different levels. The dads keep in touch much more often and communicate much more frequently than the single little girls' parents do, and that's okay. It's fine. It's their child. Just like I have cousins I talk to more often than others, right? Like it doesn't mean I love them any less. It just means that's how it is, right?
Right.
From the parent's perspective, like even if you have an egg donor, right? Like you grew this baby, it's part of either you or your partner, or maybe it's not genetically related to you, but you're the one growing this baby. You're the one keeping it alive, and you're the one that's choosing to parent it. And isn't that what makes somebody a mom or a dad or a parent, is the choice to love a child?
Right.
I have a lot of friends who were adopted, and I do find that adoptees have a very complicated outlook on surrogacy and especially on egg donation. I am not a psychologist and I cannot speak to the intricacies of that. But, I always tell my clients that have done IVF or my clients that have egg donors, and to the people that I cared for, like, if your child ever wants to meet me, I'm willing to meet them, and I'm willing to honestly and authentically answer any questions they have. And I hope that that's the same for most adoptees, right? Like there are some complicated issues when it comes to surrogacy and adult children of surrogacy and adult children of adoption. And, those are things that I just don't have the professional credentials to speak to. But I do, on a personal level, I believe that choosing to love a child is important. And the reality is whether the child is genetic related to you or not, every day, like there are days I don't like my children. I love my kids.
All the time.
I love my kids every day.
Right.
I tell my kids, my love is unconditional. No matter what you say, no matter what you do, no matter who you choose to be, mommy will always love you, right?
Right.
That does not mean I have to like your behavior.
Right.
I don't like you today. I
Right.
love you. I
Always.
love you, but I don't like you today, right?
Yeah.
We choose to love our children, whether they're genetically related to us or not. And some parents choose not to be involved in their children's lives. And, that's a whole other issue. So I always tell the people that do surrogacy, whether you're adopting an egg or adopting an embryo, I have friends and clients who have adopted embryos, that child is as much yours as you believe it's yours. And you're
Mhm.
choosing to love this child and give it life. And we all just do the best we can with the hand we're dealt. And if there are issues down the road, we'll get psychological help from professionals for that.
Yeah. So have you already had the discussion with either of the couples or parents, like how they would approach the situation? Did they say that they'll tell their children that they had a surrogate, or were they going to kind of keep it to themselves? How did that discussion, or do you know what they've
I mean,
decided to do?
I told both families that was totally up to them, that it's their child. They choose how to parent their child. Both of the couples that I was a surrogate for, the first couple, they were like his students, like the high school teacher students, were following along. They actually threw a shower that they invited me to. So
Wow.
like me with like the hugely pregnant twin belly, trundles into the school the last week of May, right? For all these high school kids to like rub my belly and stuff. And it's, he teaches at a school with kids that are incredible. And two of his students were moms themselves. And they're giving me advice on like postpartum. And I'm like, thank you. Like, you're awesome. You're amazing. Right. And one of his students had given a baby up for adoption. And she was telling me, she pulled me aside and she's like, you might feel this way and you definitely need to talk to a counselor. And I'm like, just hugged her and like, you're amazing. Like, I love you and thank you for giving me that advice.
Mhm.
But like they were very open about it and they definitely had included their community and their families in the story. And those two little girls have known from day one that they had a belly mommy and they had an egg donor and these are their two daddies,
Okay.
and they've known that from day one. And they have a grandma and two aunties that love them to death and are helping raise them. And they definitely have strong female role models in their lives, but they've always known that they had a belly mommy. And they see me, like they've seen me at Christmas and I visit them at, birthdays and send them presents. And, I'm not a daily person in their lives, but I'm definitely like on the periphery where if they would ever want to talk or have issues, like I'd be there for them. The other one, they kept it very quiet. They didn't really tell any of their friends or family. They announced it when the baby was born. Um, and they said, we had a daughter via surrogacy. And then about like 3 months later, they like introduced me to their extended friends and family circle. Um, and because of COVID, like we haven't seen each other in person. We've done some video chats and photos, shares and stuff. But to my knowledge, like they've told her that, and she's not one, she doesn't get it yet, but it's part of her existence and part of her family truth that she was born from an egg donor and a surrogate. Um, some families don't choose to do that, and I'm not going to pass judgment on them for doing that.
Right. So, what have your own children said about how do they feel about you being a surrogate when you've done it in the past, and family and friends?
So, family and friends was a whole different issue, but um, my kids loved it. Like my son was in preschool when I carried the twins. My son's just in second grade now, and my son was in preschool when I carried the twins. And he told his teacher, he goes, "Mommy has two babies in her belly." He goes, "But they're not our siblings." He goes,
Wow.
"We're just babysitting." And I thought that was a pretty good
Yeah.
understanding for a 3.5-year-old and a pretty good explanation. The preschool teacher pulled me to the side and was like, you need to take him to a counselor. Like, and she told me, and I was like, oh, I'm a surrogate. Like, he's right. Like, these are not. And she was like, it blew her mind. But my kids, like, we told them from the get-go, they met both sets of parents before we were ever pregnant. Um, they my children, my daughter bartered with the intended parents that she could come and hold the baby and see the baby because she wanted to meet she calls them her soror sisters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was like, can I at least hold the baby? you know, and she loves the photos and the updates and stuff, but they know that they're not their siblings. Do they pest me all the time to have another, a baby sister or brother for them? Yes. But I felt like they had a pretty good understanding of it. And my kids have educated a lot of their school peers and teachers about what surrogacy is.
Right. Right. So clearly you all have sat them down, you've had discussions with them, which,
Yeah.
is great because, they'll see, your belly and
Mhm.
then no baby. So yeah, that's important. It just is amazing to me the response of what is it, your teacher, your son's teacher, who
Yeah.
said like basically is like your son needs to go to counseling. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of like, whoa, that's a lot. Like
Yeah.
what happened here? Like, I don't know, just the appropriateness of that. I'm not sure. I'm kind of on the fence about that right now.
I mean, she meant well. She thought he was having two siblings and that he was in complete denial. Like,
Oh, okay.
like she meant well, but she was like, oh, okay. Like, she's like, why
Yeah.
is this kid like lying and does not want his siblings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
a lot of times it's harder for people, again, like just friends and family. I don't know how you could do that and give them away. Well, they were
Hmm.
never mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I'm just babysitting. They're not mine to keep or to give away. I have to
Hmm.
return them to their parents, you know. Um it's just I think people who haven't been through it, and especially people who haven't been through infertility, I don't think they have a framework for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So because we have so many women in the group who, again, who have struggled with infertility, and surrogacy is not a topic of discussion, not huge because, most women want to try to have babies naturally. But again, the option of having egg donors, is also presented to them as well. But again, we haven't really spoken a lot. I haven't seen a lot of posts about surrogacy, but I think that that is a great option for a lot of women who, maybe for whatever other reason they can't have a baby, but their eggs are decent
Right.
and that another woman can, bring them to life. And so I think that's definitely something that women should visit if they are, at that point. So I think that's great and amazing that again, yeah, you have people who are willing to be surrogates, especially, after having your own children and knowing what it's like. But the way that you process it and approach it is what I think is just phenomenal. Like you said, like you're just babysitting, you're just bringing
Mhm.
them into the world. So thank you again for, just having that mindset and that perspective and, just giving that gift of life to other people. Okay. So with all that being said, tell us all the services or the majority of the services, you do everything like the services that you offer your clients and where people can find you and contact you.
Yeah, my website is www.theohiodoula.com. Um, And we jokingly say we're everything you need for the birthing year, right? We do childbirth education. We offer Lamaze, traditional, we call it quick and dirty. It's a 1 day crash course. We have a sense of humor, quick and dirty. We just puke birth on you and then ask questions.
Wow.
Um, we do the 5 week hypnobirthing, 3 week Lamaze, and then there's another gal in our practice that does a 12-week Bradley course, which is like a master's class on childbirth education. And then we offer unlimited labor support, which includes prenatals, attendance at the labor, whether that's home, hospital, or a birth center. And then we typically stay, 2 hours postpartum. And then that includes a postpartum visit in the home where you can process your birth and ask any questions about newborn parenting. And then we also offer lactation support. And that can look, we are not dogmatic about lactation, just like our non judgmental approach to birth. We have a non judgmental approach to lactation. Um, Breastfeeding or chest feeding does not have to be all or nothing. You can chest feed and supplement. You can supplement at the chest. You can
Mm.
exclusively pump and feed pump milk. You can feed formula. We don't have any opinion on that. We just help you figure out what's going to work for you.
Oh,
And then we also offer in-home postpartum support. So for some people, that's just helping them out during the day and helping them figure out their new normal and, giving them a chance to take a shower or a nap and making dinner for them and folding some laundry. For other people, those are overnights where, we're recovering from a C-section and, we're having trouble with chest feeding and so we're supplementing. So why not call in reinforcements that can take the baby overnight and keep your baby safe and healthy and fed and do your laundry for you, and you wake up to breakfast and a healthy baby that you've been able to sleep through the night so that you can heal from your surgery. So we offer all of those services because we really want to take care of families and help them figure out their new normal and be not just physically safe, but physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually healthy in the birthing year.
yeah. So I didn't find out about doulas until like within the last few years. So I didn't have one. It sounds like a phenomenal idea. And so I, learned about doulas. Like, okay, that's great. And then I interviewed someone on the podcast a while back who said that she had a postpartum doula. And I was like, what? Wait, like, what is that? And she was like, I was like, what do they do? What's the difference between a postpartum doula and a nanny? She was like, because the nanny focuses on the baby and the postpartum doula focuses on you. Like, and I was like, well, how does that look? What does she do? She's like, anything that I need her to do. She was like, she was really like struggling with baby blues and all of that. She was like, it was just amazing. So, that's also something that people should look into because it is hard. And, culturally, we're just a little bit different here in the States as far as support. We're like kind of like we're sent home with the baby as opposed to a lot of other cultures where there's like intergenerational families living together. So the support is always there. So that's amazing as well.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask you, are your classes in person or are they virtual or both?
Both, especially since COVID. We offer virtual classes, we do private classes, we do in-office group classes. Obviously, our group classes have been cut in half, so we can only have half as many people as we would normally have. But because of COVID, I've had people from, other states taking my classes now, which I think is great. Um, why not? Now that we've figured out the technology, let's, use it to our benefit, right? We,
Yeah.
we might have had to do it for a not great reason, but, let's enjoy it while we have it.
Yeah. So you offer a lot of services and you can't just do this as a one woman show. Do you have a great staff that helps you with all of this?
Yeah. I have 4 independent contractors that work with me. Another one that's a CLC, all of them are certified birth and postpartum doulas. And then, another Lamaze educator, a Bradley educator, one is a midwifery student. She's, becoming a certified professional midwife. So yeah, like most doulas work on their own. And I did that for 6 years. And it's really, really hard. Like on call lifestyle is hard. The
Mhm.
average doula does this work for 3 years and then she retires and finds another career um, because it's hard. That's why, after doing it for 6 years, I created my group and we help each other. And the benefit of it to our clients is that they don't just get my experience and my knowledge. They also get these other 4 phenomenal, like I have all of these resources and beyond our group of 5, like I have 12 years of contacts and experience and relationships in our community and people that I can go to and ask questions like, hey, my client is facing this. Does this sound right to you? Like I have maternal fetal medicine obstetricians that I know and can ask questions of, and they'll be like, who is her doctor? you know,
Wow.
and it's like, hey, you need a second opinion. Like I'm never going to give medical advice, but I can send them to places where they can get sound evidence based medical advice. And especially, sadly, in the world that we live in, especially where I live in Columbus, Ohio, but, we're like 3rd or 4th in the country. Um, but where I live, BIPOC are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth and their babies are twice as likely to die in the first year of life. And we we had this infant mortality task force that worked for 6 years to try to figure out why. And the answer was institutional racism. And, anytime that we can make the system work better for everybody, I think that's really, really important. And sadly, we have seen statistical evidence that for BIPOC, having a trained support person present as a witness improves treatment and improves outcomes.
Yeah.
Shouldn't need to be that way.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that is how it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're very blessed that in Columbus, Ohio, we have an incredible organization called ROOT, ROOTT, Restoring Our Own Through Transformation. It was founded by a Black midwife here that she has created this organization where they have fundraising and they train BIPOC to be doulas and labor support and lactation counselors so that we can have peers supporting peers and improving outcomes. And we're lobbying for Medicaid support and payment of birth and postpartum support in the state of Ohio, so that we can get appropriate support to the people who need it the most. Young women, women who are economically disadvantaged, BIPOCs that are being killed by our medical system. These people need advocates and they need adequate support that our medical system just does not provide.
That's amazing. I had really thought about all of that. So now my attorney mind is working, right? So I'm like, you're like advocate, and I'm like, yeah, the thing that you just said, as far as like having someone there as a witness, can profoundly change how things happen, and
Yep.
had never even occurred to me. Because yeah, there are so many women who are like scared of the statistics that they see in giving birth and mortality rate and like all of that. But that makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
definitely, unfortunately, it is unfortunate that it happens, but having a support person there, was actually kind of vital, or, really comforting as
Yeah.
well, to know that
Yeah.
someone is there who was allowed to be there
Right.
and
And
they know what's
sometimes
going
it's
on.
just so hard to use your voice. Like when you are in a vulnerable, and giving birth is a vulnerable situation. And
Mhm.
when you are in a vulnerable situation, it is so hard to use your own voice. And I have seen women being medically abused. And I've heard women use their voices saying, stop, don't, it hurts, stop, please stop. And the husband or the partner is crying and upset and being traumatized and doesn't know what to do. And, sometimes having, I don't like to say it disinterested, but to a point, a disinterested third party where I can stand there and say, client, what I hear you saying is you no longer consent to this procedure and you
Mm,
withdraw consent for this medical procedure now. Is that the case? And then the birthing person can say, I don't consent. I don't consent, because you can say stop all you want to. But
mm,
when you say in a medical situation, you say, I do not consent, because
yeah.
then it becomes medical assault, right? And so giving people the words and the opportunity to advocate for themselves is really what doulas do. And I
Yeah.
think it's so important when we're in an institution that treats people based on the color of their skin and the size of their pocketbook, or, how good your insurance is, they treat them differently.
Right. Right. That's amazing. That's a whole different conversation.
Yep.
But
Sorry.
that no, it's great because that definitely encourages me to have that conversation even more and bring on more guests just to talk about that. That's amazing. And because so many women in this group, in the group that I founded and started, there's the anxiety is really, really high. And
Yeah.
not just for giving birth, but because this means so much more to them, because a lot of times they've had so many miscarriages
It's
at
your
this
one
point.
chance,
Yeah. So,
right?
and we've talked to so many people who feel like the doctors have tried to pressure them into doing something, and then they're on them because of their age, because they're so much older. It's kind of like you don't know any better. And yeah, and
Right.
I felt that way with my son when I had gestational diabetes, so they said. And they try to force medication on me. And I was just like, hey, wait a minute, just like give me a minute, let me figure this out. No, it's gonna get worse. Like you're
Can I
going to
maybe
be on this
talk to a
medication.
nutritionist? Like,
Yeah, and the nutritionist,
yeah,
like when I spoke with the nutritionist, it was like, oh, it was amazing. Like I understood a lot more, and that helped. But it was kind of like, no, go on medication. And I'm like, okay, whoa, hang on, well, hold on, like, wait a minute. So yeah, it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. So
yeah.
I definitely appreciate you bringing that up. And I don't want to hold you any longer, but again, so everyone, they can if you're in the Ohio area, or what area is it in Ohio?
Ohio, yeah. We
Okay,
serve
all of
most of
Ohio.
Ohio. Yeah.
Okay. So the Ohio Doula.com. I'll also put the information in the show notes. So again, Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us and all this wealth of information. I've gone even further than we normally do anyway, even with the long ones. So I appreciate it. And I wish you the best of luck and success with everything. And I'll definitely be in contact with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for
Take
having me. Have a
care.
good night.
Sure, you too. Bye-bye.